Welcome to the Air Medical Today podcast. My name is Edward Ero, and I am your host for episode 37 on March 17th, 2021. This podcast is part of the Ero Podcast Network, podcasts that inform by focusing on both the news and the people behind the news. With each episode of Air Medical Today, we explore a specific area of the air medical industry and community through the use of interviews. You can find Air Medical Today on the web at airmedtoday.com and on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. The audio podcast is also indexed on iTunes, and the video version is on YouTube. For additional information about the guests on the podcast, I also provide background data on the Air Medical Today website. If you would like to become a sponsor and or leave feedback, please write to webmaster@airmedtoday.com or call 612-367-6052. Today, I am interviewing Mr. Michael Benton, the founder, managing director, and principal consultant with VyClimb Consulting, LLC, based in Highlands Ranch, Colorado. Before we get to the interview, I want to go over some feedback from previous episodes and provide some general updates. As I announced before, Air Medical Today is also a video podcast now. As always, you can listen to the podcast and now watch it on the new Air Medical Today YouTube channel. The link to the channel is on the Air Medical Today website. If you have not listened to past podcasts, please take the time to do so. There is some great information on how many of the large nonprofit air medical consortium programs operate, as well as how they are reacting and adapting to the COVID-19 pandemic, including handling the stress that has caused for the frontline staff. Please tune in to these informative and timeless podcasts. I would also like to thank the followers of Air Medical Today on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. To date, Air Medical Today has over 28,000 likes or followers, and it is increasing every day. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to welcome Michael Benton, the founder, managing director, and principal consultant with VyClimb Consulting, LLC, on the podcast today. Mike started VyClimb Consulting in 2015 and had previously worked at Air Methods and Medtrans Corporation as an air medical line pilot, relief pilot, aviation compliance manager, check airman, and regional aviation manager. He served in the United States Army from 1993 to 2008 as a standardization instructor pilot and instrument flight examiner. Mike's consulting has taken him worldwide on a number of projects. He holds a bachelor's and master's from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and an MBA from Colorado State University. Welcome to the Air Medical Today podcast, Mike. It's really great to have you on. I've been wanting to talk to you for some time.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
I always like to start off with, your background, and you certainly have a very interesting one from the different things that you've done. But you were in the Army from 1993 to 2008. Talk about the different positions you had while serving, and then how you became a helicopter pilot.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when I first joined the military, I was attending UNLV in Las Vegas, and to be honest, was a little burned out on school. So I joined the military to become a Korean linguist interrogator. So I went to the language school in Monterey, California.
Now, wait a minute. How did you become a Korean language? How did that happen?
Yeah. So, I initially requested, you take testing and they tell you what's a good fit. And I had fairly good scores. So a foreign language was in my future. So I went into military intelligence. And I initially was hoping for German, and my orders said Russian. And in true Army fashion, I got Korean when I arrived. So for the next 63 weeks, 8 hours a day, every day, stuck in the same classroom learning Korean. So Not exactly the best choice as far as trying to change the scenery. But that's where I ended up. And then, while I was there, a warrant officer recruiting team came along, and there was the pilot with his long hair and sunglasses and flight suit. So I was like, I could do that. I flew sailplanes as a kid, and I thought I'd go ahead and get in there and give that a try. So I went to flight school and flew the OH-58 Delta. It's an armed reconnaissance helicopter. A couple deployments, Bosnia and Iraq.
Wow.
Peacekeeping and combat operations. So that's really where I got my start in the aviation world. And then,
so how long were you a helicopter pilot while you were in the Army in those years?
I was in the Army 15 years, and the first 2 or 3, so about 12 years or so.
Yeah. So you actually saw combat missions?
Absolutely. Yeah. We peacekeeping missions in Bosnia, which was pretty tame. Basically Overwatch and keeping an eye on both sides, making sure everybody stayed where they were supposed to be.
Was that after most of the hostilities?
Yeah, that was at the tail end of the hostilities. That was for S4, the stabilization of forces.
Yeah.
And then for Iraq, it was in 2003 and 2004. So we arrived after the initial push into Baghdad. Our first month or so that we were there, Saddam was captured, and we all thought maybe we get to go home early. But 14 months later, and probably about 1,000 hours of combat time, most of it night vision goggle, actually. So
wow.
Yeah, it was quite an experience.
Yeah.
And then my last assignment in the military was with the Directorate of Evaluation and Standardization, which is similar to the FAA in the Army. It was a great time. It was 15 years, but I was ready for a change. Really,
yeah.
That's why I decided to get out.
Yeah. So, do you still know Korean? Has that been useful? Has that been useful to you after?
It's one of those things that, if you don't use it, you lose it. About 2 years ago, my wife and I went to Seoul just for that reason, so I could try to impress her with my skills. So I actually remembered more than I thought I would. And as recently as during pandemic here with the stay at home, I started doing some online language training. So I burned through the first beginner courses, and I'm trying to get it back.
Yeah, well, that's a good language to know, really.
Yeah.
Given what's going on.
For sure.
So your first year out of the Army, you took a position with Medtrans Corporation as a national relief pilot. Why were you interested in air medical transport? And name a few of the places that you were as a relief pilot.
Yeah, so, from what I could see in the military, you don't know a whole lot about the civilian side of things. The mission itself seemed rewarding. And to be honest, the flying seemed like it would be more exciting, more along the lines of what we did in the scout role in the Army, flying to unknown locations, short notice, that type of thing. So that was my initial, foray into it. I wanted to come out and start out as an instructor like I was in the military. But it seemed like most of the big companies wanted you to have some air medical line experience first. So I flew, like you said, with Medtrans. I was actually a base pilot out in North Colorado Medevac, out of Greeley near Boulder in Colorado.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
Great place to be. I mean, I lived in Colorado at the time, and it was a great opportunity to explore the state, while I'm out there getting paid to fly. And then as the relief role, some of the places, Wings Air Rescue, out in Virginia, Regional 1,
oh, sure.
South Carolina. And I think a couple, I don't want to date myself, but a couple of them are gone now, but it was somewhere near Odessa, Texas. And there was one, and then another in Colorado Springs. All those with Medtrans as well.
So what type of aircraft were you flying? And
so it was a Bell 407 MBG as well, which was great because in the Army, I flew the OH-58 Delta, which is really the military variant. So, I was in a happy place. You take the same aircraft and lose all that extra weight of the weapons and countermeasures.
Yeah.
Just a rotation. And so I felt very, very at home and enjoyed it.
Did you find it difficult going from program to program as far as the different cultures at the programs or, working with the different staff?
I wouldn't say it was difficult. I think what was great about it is it kept me from getting complacent. And I didn't necessarily know it at the time, but in my consulting now, that's one of the things you see is, somebody who's been at the same program for so long, doing the same thing. And in our world, single pilot for the most part, you rarely fly with another pilot. So as you start to get less and less compliant, you start to drift from the norm. Sometimes you don't even realize it, until your check ride. So what I found is by going to these different bases and flying with, the different cultures and different people, I felt like it kept me sharper and it made me a better pilot as a whole.
Interesting. Yeah, I know sometimes it's different, especially the clinical staff can be a little bit different on how they operate, and depending on if you're operating out of a hospital or.
Yeah, I believe so. But at the same time, I think as a relief pilot, they probably treated me a little different. I was a new face in town. We had to establish trust and a rapport very quickly. I mean, you walk in the door, they meet you, and you're going on a flight. So I felt like it really I feel like relief pilots have an extra duty in the sense of trying to establish that trust quickly.
Yeah. So late in 2008, you took a position with Air Methods as a check airman and an aviation training manager. And then you served in that position to 2011. Talk about the duties that were involved and how much did you travel with that position?
Yeah, so that was my first position with Air Methods. Like I said, I started at MedTrans to get that air medical experience on the line first. And when I came over to Air Methods, I was unique in the sense that I was the sole Denver-based check airman. And what came along with that Denver position was the responsibility for all new hire training. So, at the time, I think every month we had a class, maybe 15 people would come through. So I was responsible for all the scheduling. I would teach many of the ground school courses. But it was a chance for me to really get to know a lot of people and expand my network in air medical. Travel-wise, I didn't travel as much as other check airmen that were based in the field, but maybe 50% of my time at the peak. But that was, again, just intentional. I didn't want to just teach ground school in a bubble. I wanted to go out and do check rides and training out in the field to get a feel for what was really happening out there. So that was, go ahead. Sorry.
As a check airman, then did you, was it one or two pilots at a time at each base, or did they schedule it?
No, we would typically, it really kind of fluxed over the years. Sometimes you'd have a one-off pilot who was due for something, but, to make it efficient and minimize cost, we tried to align everybody at the bases so we could come out. It's a balance, right? You can either do all the training in once and save the money on travel time, but you might risk taking the base out of service for much longer if you don't have a spare. That's one thing, this whole industry, as is a lot of trade-offs.
Yes.
Everybody wants to do the right thing, but there's a lot of opposing forces.
So how often would you stay at a program to do check airman work?
It really depended. A lot of times, one of the best, smoothest running processes I had was with Air Life Denver, because their PAM, Jesse Fontes, he was a training captain. So what he could do is go through and conduct a lot of the recurrent training ahead of time. And then I could come in and do check rides. I might be a little biased too, because they're Denver based. So they're my local program. Yeah. But, in something like that, the process, if you're trying to avoid out of service time and they have access to a spare, it could be a week long process. But, some places you'd come in and try to get, four pilots done in a couple of days just to minimize out of service time.
And then were you doing, what type of aircraft were you working with?
So that was, again, the Bell 407 as well as NVG. Again, I felt very fortunate in that I had so much experience in the military and then EMS, very comfortable in that aircraft. One of the other responsibilities I had, because I was in Denver and was interviewing, I was on the interview board for all the new pilots. Oh, so that was a great learning experience, because I was able to see, the huge range of applicants. We'd come in, usually schedule them, 1 or 2 days. We'd come in, suit and tie that day and ask the questions over and over and over. And it was interesting to see and meet all those people. I've always had a kind of joke that I collect contact information as far as like networking. So, many of those pilots, if I felt like there was a potential down the road to network, I'd always keep their information and try to stay in touch with them through the years. Interesting.
What were the key things that you'd be looking for in an interview on a pilot? Especially for air medical,
Yeah. So it was interesting. So, the vast majority of our pilots were former military.
Yep.
And like, I feel confident talking about this being former military myself, but one of the things we looked for was that they weren't stuck in a mission first mindset, you got to get the mission done, because as you know, in civilian air medical, it's very different than, say, the old style Coast Guard or mission accomplishment you might expect in the military. Honestly, the most important piece was personality and ability to not come into a base and be toxic. And also decision making. That's what we always joke, right? We pay pilots to make good decisions. We had some technical questions back then that we would ask, airspace and some other things. And to be honest, that's the easy part. The flying, the limitations, the regulations, that's the easy part. The hard part is the personality and being able to make decisions and stick with them.
Yeah, it's very interesting. My experience with that is I've seen, again, most of the pilots coming from the military, that the ability to work, in an air medical environment with nurses and paramedics that are used to making decisions too, and not having that. I think it's more of a crew resource management type of thing, where it's just I'm in charge. We're going to do what I want to do, and I saw some pilots not be able to make that transition very well.
Yeah. And it seems like the different backgrounds that the pilots come with pose different challenges. So in my world, we could fly single pilot. Very rarely happened. So we had a multi-crew type environment, but because it was a single pilot aircraft, it was really two single pilots operating together. We didn't have training in our roles to have true multi-crew tasks, if that makes sense.
Right. Yes.
So those guys seem to do pretty well transitioning into the single pilot world. The ones that and again, these are some generalizations. I don't want to make people assume that that's what I feel about everybody, but people coming from, say, a UH-60, where they may be doing multi-crew IFR training, that type of thing, or operations. They seem to have that down, but at the same time, now they move into a single pilot role and they're doing it all on their own. And like you said, they're not necessarily the boss. They're the final authority for the aircraft operation.
Sure.
But you got to play well with others. So.
Yeah. No, that's some good points. That's great experience to have too. So in 2011, through August 2015, you served as an aviation compliance manager, again with Air Methods. What type of activities were you involved with, and especially put an emphasis, things I think are real interesting are the safety management piece and then operational control center.
Yeah, absolutely. So my primary role was the Operations Control Center, the OCC. I took that over from Dennis McCall. He helped start that with Air Methods years before. 1,500 pilots, 400 aircraft at Air Methods, and somebody's got to keep an eye on that to make sure that we're doing what we say we're supposed to do. Right? We're compliance. That's why the compliance piece. One of the things I did when I was there is we actually created and stood up a backup OCC, because if you think about it, it's a very major source of failure, single point failure there that could happen if that OCC went down. And you probably had the same feeling the first time you saw it. Most people are surprised when they walk in and see there's 2 or 3 people that are watching that. They averaged 70 aircraft airborne 24/7, peaking up to 120 at the peak sometimes. And that's really a testament to the software systems that they had. The software that would automatically alert and that type of thing. Another role I had in that compliance role was as an accident investigator. I was part of the operators go team at Air Methods. And which interesting, it's been the topic of the last few weeks of blog posts that I've had on my website about some of the lessons learned. But in my time, Air Methods had a very low accident rate as compared to the rest of the industry, but they had so many flight hours and so much exposure that generally, 13, 14 months was the time between each fatal accident. And again, it sounds horrible. It is horrible. But as far as accidents per flight hour, it was a pretty low rate of accidents. Right. So yeah, I was party coordinator, various roles, but always representing the operator on those accidents.
So you would actually go out to the site and be out there with the NTSB and
absolutely. Yeah, we were had a bag packed, very short notice. 24/7. We'd get a call, everything from flying commercial out to getting a PC-12 from an Air Methods customer that offered to come up and get us and take us to an accident. And most of the accidents were pretty high profile. Mosby was one of those. That's the fuel starvation accident. Mm-hmm. Killed all the crew members and the patient. And then that was really one of the first ones I was on. And then the last one before I left Air Methods was the accident in Frisco, where the fatal with Pat Mahaney and the post-crash fire. So, yeah, I mean, it's, a horrible thing to have to be a part of, but I must say that it was probably the most rewarding activity I did at Air Methods, because you're truly playing a part in prevention and trying to get to the bottom of things, and representing the operation at those events.
Were you doing that with the Operational Control Center at the same time, or those?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I was still over the OCC. It's a testament to the staff I had in there. It's great group of people. Can't take credit for that. I mean, we get the right people in place. I could sleep well at night knowing that we had a great team in the OCC. And it was really, one of the industry firsts. So it was a good one. You'd mentioned the safety management system. So Air Methods was actually part of the SMS pilot project.
Right.
The FAA first talked about SMS.
Yes.
So this is long before FAR Part 5 came about, requiring SMS for, scheduled air carriers. So yeah, it was blazing new territory. Of course, that the credit goes to the safety department for heading that off. But I feel like that's really what kind of built the foundation for me. And one of the reasons why that's a big component of what we do at VyClimb is SMS implementation today. So, yeah.
Yeah, some interesting activities. Yeah, having visited Air Methods several times, I remember seeing the Operational Control Center. But the thing that always impacted me was that big screen with all the flights going on at the same time. And it's just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's overwhelming when if you don't know what you're looking at. On the screen. But again, and it's neat to see how that software has evolved. In some of what I do now, I work with software vendors, and just to think back about how basic some of that software was and how we did it before, when the people before us did it with, pen and paper, right? So it's just neat to see the evolution.
Yes. Right. So August 2015, we come up and you started your own company called VyClimb Consulting. How did you come up with that name? And does it stand for something, or?
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. You're starting a new business. You need a creative name, right? Something that's not taken. I'm sure somewhere I have notes from all the other ideas I had. There's a lot of leading edge aviation companies out there. So I was trying to find something that was unique or different. It's got to be available, right? It's got to have a web domain. Today's day and age, it's got to have social media available, all those things.
Sure. Yeah.
So, one of the reasons we went with that is, in aviation, there's a thing called V speeds. A lot of people think that stands for velocity. Kind of. It's actually a French word, vitesse. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's a French word that means speed, and that's what the V comes from. And these V speeds are typically, determined during the engineering and design process. And there's different speeds, V1, V2, VX, VY. And those speeds, are basically a way to, if you follow those speeds for the different operations you're doing, it enhances safety, right? It enhances safety and performance. So for VY, it's the best rate of climb airspeed. So for an aircraft, there's a designated VY speed. It's the best rate of climb. And it has with continued forward progress. So I thought, okay, VY, that's helping a company climb to new heights, helping them continue forward. It's the most efficient way forward. A VY climb is kind of where I came up with that. But it's interesting, one of my first blog posts, I talked about a unintended consequence of that name. I thought it was pretty clever. And most aviation people I deal with, pilots in particular, VY, that's cool. That makes sense. But it's interesting is a lot of the business leaders, my true customers, I guess you could say, the people that are willing to sign a contract, they're always like, VyClimb, what the heck's VyClimb mean? And in the beginning, it was very frustrating. And sometimes I just smiled and said, oh, it's a clever name, But I learned that it actually opened the door for me to briefly explain what it means, politely correct them. And then a year later, when I run into them, they remember it. They remember VyClimb.
VyClimb,
You know what I mean? So I actually, like I said, I have a pronunciation on my website, and I had a whole blog post about this as well. So
I haven't read that one. That's interesting. I did not know that. When you were saying V1, V2, I think of Nordic skiing.
Well, that's the thing. You got to come up with something that kind of speaks to your providers. So if you walk up and call me VyClimb, I usually kind of smile a little bit at first because but it worked out. It worked out for the better. So and it's actually, I actually submitted an application to trademark my logo and name. So trying to have a big vision and positivity going forward.
Yeah, no, that's I like the idea of the climbing, helping clients climb. So you and I first met, and I think you had already left Air Methods, but you did some work immediately for Air Methods, and were assigned to Lifelink 3 as the acting PAM, or Program Aviation Manager. And I remember how smooth that went, because I think a lot of the pilots knew you from your Czech Airman days, and you adapted to the culture real well. We really, to this day, appreciated the work that you did when you came in and helped us with that, because we did have a problem in that area. But then that work was used by Air Methods as a nationwide standard for in management restructuring. What exactly was the change, and how did?
Yeah, and I may be mistaken, but I think it was called Project One, if I'm not mistaken. But like any corporation, you do some restructuring, that type of thing.
Right.
So, as you mentioned, PAM, Program Aviation Manager. What I found quickly coming in to help at Lifelink is that, that PAM being the highest level of contact that you as a customer would have with the operator, just the fact that they were typically from an aviation background, and they were filtered through that aviation filter. Just it's human nature, right? If something comes along and there's a conflict between logistics or say maintenance or flight operations, it's natural for somebody that's born and raised in that aviation realm to kind of default to the aviation side. So what we had was a lot of issues where, flight training or heavy maintenance would come along and there wouldn't be much communication to the customer, or it's almost like the person, because they answered up through aviation chain of command, they didn't give as much weight to the business side of things and the need to stay in service, that type of thing. So I believe, and it wasn't exactly what we modeled, but we built up a position there at Lifelink. I can't remember what they called it there at Lifelink, but I know Air Methods, I think it became the area manager. And what it was, in some ways, an easy way to explain it was almost like a regional vice president minus, you know what I mean? Like a lower level. And the point is that they had a reporting structure, not just to the aviation side or maintenance, but it truly went up through the business channel. So the idea was to try to remove some of the silos between aviation, maintenance, logistics, that type of thing, and get somebody in there with some business experience. Very well-known person in the industry, Josh Howell, had come up from San Antonio.
Yep.
He and I spent some time, kind of doing that handoff, and he was really that first person in that role at Air Methods. And I believe the leadership at Air Methods saw that success and they wanted to duplicate it. I think it may not have been as successful nationwide as it was at Lifelink, because there's just some necessities, some things that were changed. But yeah, it was a good move, and I'm not sure about today, but I think it helped set them up for breaking down the silos, really.
Yeah, it was a big change, because it wasn't what I was used to, and I had been in a number of different programs, and you're telling us you're going to put a non-aviation person in that role, and I said, how is that going to work exactly? And of course, Josh has a lot of experience. Working with aviation and business, and on the clinical side too.
And I think that's what's interesting is, that they wanted to duplicate the success, and as you know, it's more than just duplicating the position. It's the person that's in it.
Yes.
So, I mean, much credit to Josh Howell. He's up and coming. He's a rock star in the industry. What they should have done is duplicated Josh Howell and put him all over the country.
In fact, when they interviewed me, I think that's what I told them. You've got to, clone Josh, and then you'll be fine. But I think the other thing that worked at LifeLink in that model is that it was just our system, all our bases.
One program, right?
Yeah. When you had multiple programs, it was a little bit harder to tell one program director that we're going to have to put your aircraft down to do something at another program, or, the backup's not available. Where when Josh would talk to me about stuff, okay, we're going to close one base, but yet we're going to keep the other bases open, or have limited hours at one base. So I think that made a lot more. Yeah, it was easier to do for anyone to do that,
because he had he could express his loyalty to the program, and
yes,
to keep you in service, he didn't have to take someone else out.
Yes,
so that was a challenge. But you can't. It's tricky. It's a balance. How many full-time employees does it take to do it right? So,
but and Josh is back at LifeLink after spending some time out at LifeFlight Network too. So
yeah, he and I stay in touch quite a bit. Yeah, he's a good guy.
Great to have him back. And then later, you served as a consultant to LifeLink 3 when we were first exploring the FAA Part 135 certificate, and the steps that we'd need to take. I had myself run a Part 135 program, but hadn't really started at all from scratch. It was a merger in Kalamazoo where we took the certificate from the one program that had a 135. So it was a lot easier transitioning than, completely starting from scratch. You also assist, I know we're assisting another organization or other organizations with Part 135 certificate. Was this something that you were interested in, and you're still doing that type of work?
I am. Yeah, it's interesting because, FAA, there's very clear guidelines and instructions and a process to follow to get a 135 certificate. It's available. Anybody can look it up. But I think the experience I had managing the certificate and helping merge certificates at Air Methods, together with the 119 team when I was there, it's almost like another language, right? You know how to read the FARs, you know how to work with the FAA in TSB and so on. That company in Houston, they were starting a 135 VIP helicopter service, similar to like Blade, you may have heard out in New York. So that was an example of one of those. And then, a lot of clients I work with are various, as Air Medical is very different business models. Every program, it seems like it has its own twist. But it's a fairly common question that I get from these places that have vendors like Air Methods or Metro or AirVac or whoever, that they at least want to be educated. What does it take to get our own certificate? So I've provided that information to a lot of people. Actually pulling the trigger and doing it, you see it doesn't happen a whole lot, but it seems like when it does happen, it's successful. In my mind, I felt like that 5 aircraft program and above is about the time that these programs are saying, I don't get the attention I need from my operator. I get just as much attention as this guy over here that has 1 aircraft. So that's when they start to get they need better customer service, and they start looking out to do their own thing.
So what are the key things that a program, I get asked this a lot too, and I could answer this question too, but coming from you, what are the things that people need to consider a Part 135? Besides the number of aircraft?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think to make it successful, one of the first things you need to do, and this is something I told LifeLink, is to get your new certificate team in place, at least part of it, and have them do the work. I am not a big fan. There's plenty of places out there, you can find them online, where you can just either buy a certificate that's existing or buy pre-made manuals that are just cookie cutter.
Yes, I remember you telling us that.
Yeah, and to me, the issue, and it's tricky, from a business perspective, you're saying, well, I don't want to start paying a director of operations, director of maintenance, chief pilot I don't want to have to pay those people yet. I mean, I don't have my own certificate. So what's the point? If you can get the right 119 team in place early and you're willing to commit the funds to do that, they can build it. They have ownership, they have buy-in. It's their program in the sense that they're not having to come in and learn some cookie cutter operations. They can build it with best practice in place. I'm not positive, but I believe that's how LifeLink did it, is they actually hired those people well in advance,
Yes,
get them going and get them established and everything. You don't have to wait until you're deep in the process with the FAA to get started. You can start writing GOMs and maintenance manuals and SOPs in advance. So when you do decide to put in your application, you're already halfway down the road. It's the same with SMS. Some people think, well, until I apply with the FAA to do the voluntary program, I'm not going to waste any time or money getting started. Well, why not? Why not put some of those things in place ahead of time? So, and then as the transition time, that's probably your highest risk point when you have, you're trying to switch from one certificate to the other. Right. My recommendation with operators out there, and this could be, your mileage may vary, but if you've been with a vendor for a really long time, I believe you're better off being open and transparent early on that you're going to get your own certificate, and hopefully they'll be able to assist you in the process.
Yeah.
Nobody likes surprises, and I can think of a couple examples we won't mention, but when they came as a surprise, personalities get involved and people's feelings get hurt, and then it's just difficult for everybody.
Yeah, I think some of the other things too is either owning or having your own aircraft, sure. Is important, and your own insurance and so forth.
So those are both great examples of some of those steps you can take in preparation. If you feel like down the road in the future you're going to have your own certificate, you can start moving in that direction and kind of dabble in it and see how it works. So it's not such a shock.
Let me ask a question the other way. What do you think the large air operators, because I've seen some programs go back. The program in Kalamazoo where I was at had a Part 135, but then decided to get away from that. What can operators do to keep a program from going to a Part 135? Because there is a risk. I mean, you have to have enough aircraft, backup aircraft. I mean, there's certainly some security with a big operator, people like yourself that were at Air Methods that can come in. What can they do to, keep programs?
Yeah, and I think one of the risks, you didn't mention this one, but this is a big one, is competition.
Yes.
Right? Sometimes when that's a big concern. You may not be happy with your operator or whatever, but that keep your enemies close.
Yeah.
Because as soon as that business relationship is over and you have your own certificate, they might just pop in some bases around you and prevent your growth, or it can get interesting. It's interesting. It's pretty unique to the United States with our model that we use here for air medical transport versus like a government provided entity. I think when you see those switching, I'm trying to think of some examples, but it could be triggered by anything. It could be an accident that they had on their certificate and they want to be able to walk away from that and show some positive change that, hey, we switched. We're now with this large nationally recognized operation. It could be competitive reasons. It could be, like you said, the resources. That's one of the big pieces that they underestimate is when you're dealing with somebody who has a fleet of 400 aircraft. You might get spoiled with the amount of spare coverage that you have. You do see some of these smaller operators that are, I would like to say, maybe disrupting the industry a little bit, that are coming in and they're bringing to the table a lot of the same levels of safety with SMS and OCCs and that type of thing, but they don't have all that overhead of such a large company like a Medtrans or an Air Methods or somebody like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think, I think there's pros and cons to both. I mean, I always thought that at LifeLink too is, what about competition? That if you move away from your air operator, but when you get so big, there's also some uniqueness about the area that you're in that might not be recognized in the Part 135, of other things.
Yeah.
And I've always thought too, go ahead.
Well, say that, and really the model, right? What type of model are you? I've always been a fan of the consortium type model, like Lifelink 3 has, or even just nonprofit.
Yep.
You see that, again, a lot of people are misconception that nonprofit means you always operate at a loss. That's not the case. But you see, there's just a different feel when it's a nonprofit organization, or when it's its own certificate. That's what I refer to them as, a standalone. A big fan of Boston Medflight and their model that they have going on. And when you go there, it's interesting. It's very collaborative. It's not a high competitive environment, at least the feeling. Yes, there's competition, but I think they've got a good thing going. Boston is a very proud city, with Boston Strong and all that. And I think people equate a program like Boston Medflight with the city itself. So, for someone to come in and try to start an operation in competition with something like that is going to be a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. And having the hospitals, with the consortium model, having the hospitals, because that's where the, referrals are going to, that's where the patients are going. And a lot of the independent programs, just didn't have that relationship. I think you're seeing more of that with some of the independents of trying to do, with the alternative delivery model type programs, et cetera.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And I think one of the things, when I say smaller operators, they don't have to be small, one that comes to mind is Classic. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't necessarily consider them small. They're probably 25, 30 aircraft, top of my head. But with the difference, what they can bring is that personal touch. I know for a fact the CEO of Classic makes a point of visiting his bases, I think a couple times a year in person, walks in and talks to the people. And when you get into a large operation, a huge operation with hundreds of bases, it's just, they lose that. And it's really tough to standardize it across the board.
Yeah. And I always thought too, is there other things, I was exploring that even with Air Methods, is there other things that you can offer a Part 135 program? Is it purchasing or other types of things, or safety management, whatever that, and I know that might get difficult because of what certificate you're on, but
sure.
So let's talk about some of your consulting. You have very, very interesting, if you would see Mike's resume, it's a mile long with the types of consulting that you've done. And it's very interesting. We don't have time to talk about all those, but I just really like the scope and breadth of all that. But one of the ones was the Line Operations Safety Audits, or the LOSA Collaborative, I think as you call it. Talk about that organization and what are the things you worked on? That's not something I had heard of before.
Yeah, so LOSA, Line Operations Safety Audits, they really are well known in the airline industry. It's relatively new. I guess you can't say that forever, but it's relatively new to the helicopter industry. So the LOSA Collaborative was started by Dr. James Kleinecht. Basically, he was at the University of Texas, Austin Human Factors Lab. And as part of his PhD, he came up with this concept, he and his team, he takes a lot of credit for it. He should get it. But again, there's quite a few other people behind the scenes. But it was a way for them to do real world, real-time audits and observations in the cockpit to see normal operations, to see what's happening. So, there's things out there like FDM or FOQA or these other safety initiatives where there's recordings. But what's unique with LOSA is you really get the whole picture because you have a pilot observer. It's a peer that observes not just the flight itself, but when they show up for the day, the briefing, the pre-flight planning, and they get to know these crews. And by definition, these pilot observers, they're your peers, right? So you're not being observed during a LOSA by an instructor, because if you got an instructor in the cockpit, even if it's not a check ride, you're giving angel behavior, right? You're doing everything right. You're using the checklist. So the key is for a true LOSA, and there's more, you can read more about it in the advisory circulars, but for a true LOSA to occur, it's got to be, anonymous data collection. There's got to be that trust built. And there's a snapshot in time where you're having real-time observations. Those are then typed up, and data is pulled from those and coded into the database, the LOSA database. And what they're able to do is benchmark your operation against other operations that are similar worldwide. So my work with them, so Air Methods, Ed Stockhausen, the former VP of Safety at Air Methods, he brought in the LOSA Collaborative from Texas with James Kleinecht and Stephen Ingham to Air Methods to attempt to do a helicopter LOSA. So what was interesting is instead of just, slapping a new label on it and calling it helicopter LOSA, they actually went through and created new threats and error codes. Everything was tailored specifically to air medical operations. I was at Air Methods at the time, and I was assigned this as that Denver-based check airman. Nobody knew what LOSA was, and they're like, hey, the new guy can do this, right? So they sent me in, and we spent quite a few days going through and outlining what the day in the life of an air medical transport flight looked like, from showing up for work all the way through post-flight debrief and departure. So they did a LOSA project, pilot project. It went really well, able to quantify and show, basically threats and errors and the way that pilots dealt with those. After that one, I think they did a couple more LOSAs at Air Methods. Each time they came to town, I was involved in that project in some way. So when I left Air Methods in 2015, the LOSA Collaborative and I had a partnership where I was a LOSA and TIM project manager and helped on all types of LOSAs, offshore, helicopter EMS, and search and rescue. It's one of my favorite parts of a robust safety management system, just because not only do you collect this data, but you actually have narratives that support the data. Because it's easy for, say, a CEO or somebody high up in a company to say, oh, that data is inaccurate. If that was the case, we'd be crashing aircraft all the time. But when you can go back and show these narratives that are written by their own pilots of the things they saw actually happening on the flight, you can't discount that, and you've got to take action on it. But working with the LOSA Collaborative, that's taken me, spent, days in the Shetland Islands off of the North, UK, Newfoundland, working with an offshore operation, search and rescue in Western Australia. It was, if you think about the difference, flying in an exposure suit with crazy cold weather and 40-degree water in the North Sea. And then a month later, we're out in Karratha, Western Australia, where you'd rather be wearing flip-flops, and a t-shirt because it's so hot. Yeah. But what was really unique is being able to sit in the jump seat and do external observations and see such a broad snapshot of operations and, the ways they do business, and bringing that back, that knowledge back that I can use in other operations as well.
So when you're benchmarking, then is that shared back with, the pilot?
So the way it works, so what was challenging in the beginning with the helicopter world is when you do the first LOSA with the LOSA Collaborative at Air Methods, you can't really share that data with anybody else other than Air Methods, because it's pretty obvious. It's a raw look at the way they do business. Mm-hmm. So even after the second or third LOSA, you're still only benchmarking it against yourself, right? Because you're the only one that's done it. So once they were able to get some contracts, say in the North Sea with some of these offshore operators, we did a LOSA at Metro Aviation as well. Now, what you can do is if you have two or say you have three operators that are all flying the S-92 helicopter, I can now start to share some of that data between operators because it can't be identified as coming from somebody in particular. So really the value of LOSA is just starting to pick up in the helicopter world, because there's starting to be enough data where before we compared it to the airlines, now we're comparing it to other helicopter operators. But it's interesting. I don't want to take all the time on this, but I think an example, if you look at an event and you say, okay, this type of deviation from the norm or whatever, it happens a lot. Say there's something that you say, yeah, this happens all the time. You would think, okay, well, that's what I want to put the dollars towards or the time to try to fix. But maybe you have something that doesn't happen as often, but the outcome is more negative. Maybe you're actually breaking aircraft or you're getting into undesired aircraft states. even though it happens less often, maybe that's where you should spend your resources and money to address an issue versus something that happens all the time, but has really inconsequential outcomes. So, that's where the people that write the checks, at the higher levels of the company really see the value, because it allows them to measure what's happening, attack those things, try to fix some of them, and then come back, say 3 years later, do another LOSA and see tangible changes and improvements to show that money was well spent. So
would you see differences with like air medical versus offshore types of things?
Yeah. And I mean, that's to me one of the starkest differences I've seen in the industry. And this is not a negative hit on US pilots, because I'm one of them, right?
Yeah.
The level of maybe lack of, I'm trying to think of the right word. So when and a lot of it's cultural. If I'm flying in the UK on an offshore contract, it's 2 pilots, white shirts, epaulets, it's the closest thing to, say, an airline, where it's scheduled. They're very serious. There's not a lot of joking around. They take their planning very serious. If you come over to the US EMS side, where it's single pilot, it's very different. Again, not saying, single pilot operations in the US are a bunch of hot dogs and cowboys, but it's human nature. I don't have another pilot watching me. I'm on my own. The med crew may not know any different. I've done this flight 1,000 times, and there's a little bit more casual approach to the operations. So yeah, definite differences between the two.
Interesting. Yeah. And even probably the differences of air medical US versus Europe.
Yeah. I mean, stark difference I can illustrate very quickly is, flying search and rescue, or HIMS, in Western Australia. They have a Coast Guard contract. It's CHC was the operator. You have a single pilot. You have a air crewman, which, could probably do some emergency handling of the aircraft, but it also helps the medical crew. And then the medical staff, there's one person. There's one gentleman in the back. And the range of operations they perform is so much greater, in the sense that on the initial flight request, they might head offshore. So he's got to throw on a dry suit and flippers, because you're going to drop the medical crew in the water, and they're going to hoist him up to the aircraft. So true multi-mission. In that one day, we never went offshore, but we had the potential to do, say, a water rescue. We did an interfacility. We did some scene work. We did night vision goggles. It's single pilot. That air crewman is highly underrated, I think, in my opinion. Helps launch the aircraft, but also climbs in the back, helps clear the aircraft, operates the hoist. And on scene, he's another set of hands for the medical crew. He's helping, they're administering blood on the roadside, and he's pulling it out and reading off the codes and checking temperatures, and impressive, very impressive. But yes, definitely stark differences across the world in the way that we solve this problem of air medical.
Very interesting. Yeah, I could spend another, whole podcast on that. You worked with the National Transportation Safety Board, or the NTSB, and also Helicopter Association International, or HAI. Mm-hmm. For the NTSB, you were an instructor for a class called Helicopter Accident Investigation course. Talk about that and how you became interested in that course.
So, working with the NTSB through the various accidents, 4 or 5, what I would consider major events when I was at Air Methods, and just, networking with those people in the FAA and so on, had a lot of positive feedback for our team. Michael Kunis and I worked together on quite a few accidents. He was the director of safety at Air Methods at the time. And with that positive feedback, the NTSB would tell us that they really liked working with us. They liked our transparency and honesty, and just our non-confrontational approach to the investigations. And we always thought it would be neat to share that with other operators. When I attended the helicopter accident course at the NTSB, I was surprised how many people there had investigator in their title. And these are students, but had never actually been to a major accident. Obviously, that's great, right? If we could have no accidents, that would be wonderful. But it was interesting that these people who had been in the accident investigator or safety roles for years had never actually been to a scene or an accident. Huh. So once I was independent in 2015, I pitched the idea to the NTSB and said, "Hey, you guys, liked our approach. What if we put this together into a course and start sharing it with operators?" Because as an operator, it would be inappropriate for me to stand up there representing my operation and saying, "Here's all the amazing things we do. The NTSB loves us," because it maybe shows favoritism. But now that I was an independent consultant, I could go in there and say, "Hey, back when I was an operator, here's the things that we did that worked. Here's what didn't work," and maybe share that with them. So
that's great. So that was your idea with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Michael Kunis and I together were both always saying it'd be really cool to somehow teach this and share it. He still works with an operator. So again, it's not something that's conducive. But when I put together the course, I bounced it off of my NTSB and FAA contacts. The question I asked each of them was, read these slides, go through the material. Is there anything that you wish every operator knew before an accident happened?
Yeah.
And they would say, "Oh yeah, every time we go to an accident, guys show up and they have no idea, about A, B, and C." So that was the focus of what we did. So since 2016, every year I taught that course at the NTSB's helicopter accident course, except for 2020 with the pandemic. So I think those are all online right now.
So that course is going to continue though.
They do it each year. I'm not sure what the future of it is, but I believe it's scheduled for this year. I just haven't heard yet. They usually contact us towards the end of the year.
Fantastic. And then for HAI, you chair the Flight Operations Working Group and a couple of the sub working groups. Can you talk about those groups and what your work is?
Absolutely. Last year they changed. They used to be committees. So a lot of people may recognize that, the HAI Flight Ops Committee. It's now a working group. It's about a dozen people representing operators around the world. We just recently added new members to that group from Canada and Australia. And, my main goal 2 years ago when I took that working group position as the chair was to diversify our membership a bit and to kind of get things going. There was, HAI as a whole has been pushing new structure of those working groups and to make them a little more focused on industry issues, that type of thing. So right now, like I said, our main purpose is trying to get re-energized. Some of the other working groups like safety or urban air mobility, those working groups, they have quite a few things on their plate. But one of the things that's been unique with ours is starting some sub-working groups at the direction of HAI's board. So we have the vertical flight infrastructure sub-working group, used to be called the heliport subgroup. So that's head by Ricarda Bennett. She's got a team of, in her case, it's a bunch of mostly heliport and vertiport consultants. And they do things like, for example, there's a draft circular out right now for heliport design. So they're going through that as representing industry and making comments on behalf of HAI. And then we have a brand new working group, subgroup called the insurance sub-working group. As you probably saw here this year, insurance rates, they continue to go up across the board, and just looking for ways to, how can operators shield themselves from some of that? What things can be done? There's no silver bullet. It's not just, implement SMS and you save money. It's got to be tangible change and things that they can actually see in a positive way. And that subgroup, in addition to that, they're also there to help educate operators. Why are my rates going up? What's the deal, right? So both of those groups are great. We're always looking for new members. So if any listeners are interested, they can reach out, to us and put you in the right place.
Fascinating. How often do the groups meet?
Right now, they meet quarterly at a minimum. We have in the charter, we were supposed to meet in person once a year. That's supposed to be at Heli Expo, but as you know, that's been canceled. So we meet via Zoom, just looking for people who are motivated and have a little bit of free time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You've served as a consultant to many air medical programs. Let's just talk about a few of them because, as I said before, the list is a mile long. But you had mentioned Boston Medflight. What type of work did you do for them?
Yeah, so I'm helping them with the safety management system. I have a 3-phase SMS implementation process that I put together, helping operators. Ideally, when I've helped operators, I'd like to see them, like in Boston's case, go with the FAA SMS voluntary program. The thought process there, there's plenty of third parties and they do a great job, but the concern is, as you know, with the mandate for SMS coming likely in 2022.
Yes.
If you're compliant with the FAA's voluntary program, you have nothing to worry about. If you're compliant with a third party, you may have some tweaks or revisions that need to happen in order to comply with the FAA requirement. But that's what I'm doing with Boston. We're just wrapping up phase 2. So phase 1 was somewhat of an assessment of their operation, visiting all their bases, doing some interviews, that type of thing, letting them know how much of a lift it would be to get an SMS implemented. And then phase 2, I have a technical writer, and we do SMS policies and procedures manuals, help them write policy and procedure that'll help fill those gaps that they identify. And then phase 3, which is kind of the next step, is implementation, and then a final follow-up,
So you're still working with Boston?
Still working with them. Yeah. Like I said, finishing up phase 2. And, at that point,
excellent.
I hand the controls back over to them and they implement all those things that we put into policy. So
great. One of the other ones, Apollo Medflight.
Yeah. So Apollo was more of an interim management role. So I was on a contract. Jonathan Collier, another very well-known person in the industry, asked me to come over. And so at one point there, I was on contract to be the senior vice president of aviation ops and safety. And really just, as you know, everything that goes with that. So everything from implementing ASAP, MSAP, to starting them on the path for the SMS voluntary program, to everything, all the fun that goes along with, helping the director of ops and chief pilot with managing the certificate, starting up, new bases, bringing over new programs, implementing SOP, CAMES accreditation. I'm sure your listeners are very familiar with what that involved. Yeah. So in that case, it was a nearly full-time exclusive project with them. I still had some other LOSA projects and things on the side. But yeah, that was about a 18-month project.
Yeah.
So that's one of my disruptors I mentioned before. They're coming into the industry, doing great things, and making life difficult for some of the big operators, I think.
Yeah. I just talked to Jonathan not too long ago. I always like to keep up to date with what he's doing. But the funny thing is, the surprise, we were at the Air Medical Transport Conference. I think we were meeting with you guys, and you were introduced, as being with Apollo. I go, when did you start with Apollo? Yeah,
it's an interesting challenge that I've found the first few years I was consulting, is when I start to do a project, if it's too all encompassing, in other words, if I'm too involved directly with one operator, people are under this assumption that, his business didn't work out, he's working at Apollo, or the same thing we'll talk about in a bit here is North Memorial. Yeah. I was up there helping them, and I was so, what's the word I'm looking for? So engaged, so there at industry events and so on. People like, you work at you work at North Memorial now. I say, well, no, I'm still. So that's a challenge that I've been trying to make sure that people know I'm still available to help, even though I'm helping someone else.
Yeah, let's talk about North Memorial. That's one that is sort of close to home for me, being at Lifelink. Of course, they were a competitor. Of course, my thing has always been collaboration. I've always collaborated with other programs rather than, or cooperation, I guess was the term that was used. But, we even helped them with their CAMES accreditation. I mean, I just feel that you need to raise the standards for everyone. So was real interest, because I didn't realize that you had done some work there, and I was very pleased that you had. What were some of the things that you did?
So in that situation, it started out as a program assessment. So I came in, there's another consulting company, Magpie Human Safety Systems, based here in Colorado. Dr. Benjamin Goodhart runs that outfit. And he was doing a project with North Memorial and brought me in as really an air medical expert from the operations side. So I did about a week-long assessment, visited bases, talked to employees, and then just provided a report back on, again, my opinion, best practice based on my experience, what they should do. That turned into a follow-up contract directly with the hospital where I was advising Dr. Croston, the CEO there at North Memorial, really on all aspects of air medical. I joked earlier about getting too embedded. At one point, I was actually the director of operations for the certificate. Their former DO had moved on to other things, and rather than rushing and trying to hire maybe the wrong person, the desire from the FAA was, hey, why don't you're here anyway, you be the DO. So I was the director of operations. That bought us some time to find the right candidate. We brought in Tate Pointer from Apollo Medflight. Actually, he made the move over to North Memorial, and he's now the director of ops up there. But just to maybe outline some of the things that we did, they weren't using night vision goggles up until that point.
Yeah, that's a big surprise.
That was number one on my list to Dr. Croston, and to their credit and the board. Maybe it's an exaggeration, but I think it was maybe 2 weeks later, they had approval to go full night vision goggle from ASU. I mean, it was latest technology, top tier training, and they're 100% NBG now. So that's a huge.
Yeah, that was wonderful. It's one of the, Scott Sampe now is the director of the program, or I guess vice president.
The vice president.
Yeah, over all the ambulance services. But I was stopped by there on the National EMS Memorial Bike Ride, and I said, Scott, the number one thing you need to do is get night vision. He says, we're implementing now. We're doing it right now. And I said, fantastic.
That one's, I'm pretty proud. I feel good. I mean, and my caveat here, it's not like I personally did all these things, right? I was just kind of helping guide and advise and lead. Sure. But once Tate got in place and I was able to relieve myself of the DO duties, I was back in my happy place where I had a little more freedom. But night vision goggles, we revamped and rewrote really their training program, GOM. We wrote and implemented an SOP, things they were already doing, but just weren't documented, weren't like captured into a manual. It's surprising to me, coming from the military, how many operations out there don't have an SOP. They think a GOM is enough, and then they manage by verbal direction or email. So anyway, published an SOP, did a lot of recruiting and training and mentoring. Steve Latham is another name I like to throw out there. He was a well-known, well-respected maintenance manager there at Air Methods, Blue Hawaiian. We were able to get him up at North. So he's their director of maintenance now, doing great things.
Excellent.
His move was from Southern California to Minnesota. So that was quite a drastic cold weather introduction. And they have a safety program that they've started the process for SMS voluntary program, ASAP, MSAP. I mean, all the things that you would expect as what I like to call the price of entry or the cost of entry for just to do business. They're on the right track. And we were able to save a few $100,000 on insurance premiums, according to their insurance brokers, with all of the initiatives we did in the last 12 months. So
that's fantastic. I did not know that you had been up there, because I'd already left Lifelink, and it was just really pleasant to see that, because I saw some changes. There was also an article about their simulation center, which I thought was pretty unique. On site.
It's a really cool little A109 hole that they modified. Took a couple years to get it done, but it doesn't have motion. You do feel like you're moving, but they're able to do patient loading and unloading training in that same space. Yeah, as well as all the new hires get to do switchology and some practice in the sim. What's great about it is they're not using it to reduce flight hours. They're still doing the same flight time in the aircraft. It's just producing a better product. If you can get a new hire in a sim for an hour and get them familiarized with switches and just comfortable, then that first hour in the aircraft
makes it much easier.
It's much better.
Yeah. Well, it's great to see that, because I know they came off two bad accidents there, both IFR flights too. Lastly, the other one I wanted to talk about, because it's pretty unique, is Haiti Air Ambulance. What type of work did you do?
That was probably 2016, maybe somewhere around there. At the time, Haiti Air Ambulance was with Air Methods, and they were, like any program should be doing, a healthy program is going to look at, do we stay with our current vendor? Do we switch vendors? Do we get our own certificate? What's our best option, instead of just sticking with the norm? So that referral actually came through Mike Allen, I believe. Pat Dolan and Nada from the program reached out to Mike and expressed their concern, and Mike suggested that they reach out to me, and I like to call it like a program assessment. Spent about a week, visited the base in Haiti, which was a whole new experience. And, just wrote up a report for them and let them make their own decisions based on what I observed. So, yeah.
Interesting. So just in general, what other types of projects have you worked on? Types of things.
Yeah. So I can just kind of run down a list, like I mentioned, the program assessments, SMS implementation. We do some due diligence work for, say, people looking to merge or acquire other operators. So from a flight operations or to some extent maintenance point of view, we can do some due diligence. I did mention earlier, I have a tech writer that I work with who's tons of experience. She's worked at Air Methods. She's worked contracts with Lockheed Martin and countless other large corporations. Starting or enhancing operations control centers. We'll do that from my time at Air Methods. Of course, haven't done any in the last year or so with the coronavirus stuff, but LOSA, working with the LOSA collaborative as a helicopter expert. Again, I don't provide LOSA services, but I work with them as a contractor. Technical solutions, we call it. It's, if you're a software vendor, I've worked with Ramco, I've worked with True up in Canada, Complete Flight, just informally worked with them, but really just being that conduit where you can bring user feedback to the software vendors, telling them about problems operators face so they can develop the software to fix those problems. And then really some coaching and mentoring. I've had some projects where, you see these programs that have their own certificate, which is great, say like North Memorial. The problem you might run into, though, is if the program's doing well and there's not a lot of turnover and all your certificate leadership came up in the program and they're functioning day to day, they don't really see maybe best practice or what the latest thing is.
Yeah.
So because I go to so many places and work with so many clients, I can come in and provide mentoring and coaching for, say, the certificate leadership, or even to some extent on the clinical side. If I can't provide that information myself, I can introduce them to people in my network. So
excellent. Yeah, that I could see that'd be something that you'd be very good at just from working with you. So do you have other consultants that work for VyClimb, or do you have other staff that you have?
Yeah, so we have one other person on the core team. When I say core team, it's Linda Benton, my wife. So she has a background in finance, business systems, strategy. She worked at United Rotorcraft for quite a while, and Air Methods as well. Really, directly with Mike Slattery, the former president there at UR. So one of the things she brought is, with her CMA and her certifications in competitive analysis, is the data that I was able to collect for, say, program assessments or due diligence. She's able to, I hate to even say it, like, she's able to make it more usable. You know what I mean? Where before I could kind of get the data and present it, her special skill is the ability to really have that impact, that visual impact that speaks to, say, the board of directors. If I do a due diligence on maintenance status, I'm going to bore you to death with the details because I think that's what's interesting. Where her background in briefing, CEOs and so on, she breaks it down. She's like, look, classify these aircraft red, yellow, or green, high risk, low risk, no risk, that kind of thing. So that's been great. It's been great. And then outside of that, we don't have any other full-time people, but I have quite a few people that I've subcontracted with or just reach out, tech writers, clinical or maintenance experts. I actually have an intern right now from the military. The military has a career training program. So my first attempt at that, and it's somebody who's a former Apache pilot, safety officer, and he's getting out of the Army here in 6 months or so. So they have an internship program where he can start learning, kind of the civilian way of speaking and how the industry works. And then eventually I'll make some introductions and try to see if we can place him someplace in the civilian world. So it's kind of like an internship mentorship thing.
Do you have to apply to the military to be certified to do that?
To some extent, he approached me first. It's funny because he said a lot of the people do this internship at, gun stores and in gyms, so they can just kind of slough off. But he was actually, he's taking a little more serious. He wants to work in the aviation world as a pilot safety professional.
Yeah.
And it was just a natural fit. So he took care of all the back end stuff and got approved. So yeah, I have an intern.
Yeah. Excellent. I noticed I'm actually following it now. The VyClimb has a blog, which is quite informative, and I'll have a link in the show notes for people to get to it. But I actually following that on Air Medical Today, where I put out news and information. So how did you get this started, and why did you start it?
So we relaunched the whole redesign and launch of our website during the pandemic. A lot of in-house cleanup, stuck at home with, COVID. And it was kind of the natural next step. I wanted a mechanism to share my message and share the things I learn in my operations. I find that most of my operations, when I'm doing a project, the same questions, the same challenges are everywhere I go. So I thought a blog and eventually a podcast would be a good place to answer some of those questions and share that with a larger audience, because that's the reason I started this. I left working for one company because I wanted to make a bigger impact across the industry as a whole. So I thought the blog was a way to do it, and it helps drive traffic to the website, of course. But yeah, it's a good way to stay in touch and network too, with all these cancellations we've had.
Yeah, for the listeners out there, do follow Mike's blog. It's very informative. And so you're actually looking at starting a podcast now too. What topics are you looking to cover, and why the interest in this area?
So I think, the topics are going to be, so basically I'm going to view the podcast as just another medium. Some people don't have the time or desire to sit and read a blog. I do try to keep my blog posts, 2 to 3 minute tops, just a quick read that you can catch between meetings or whatever. So what I'm looking at is the more popular blog entries, the one that gets, more questions or more hits kind of a thing, maybe expanding on those in a podcast. Maybe do some interviews with some of my network and, big players in the industry. But, helicopter shopping, SMS, common questions I face, any of those topics that are out there I've considered. So I kind of joke that I've got everything ready. I've got a plan. I've got my list of 34 topics. I just need to start doing it.
Yeah.
I think that's the hurdle, just to start recording. So
yeah, it's a fun. I've been doing podcasts since 2009, and it's interesting. As I said, I always learn something new about people, and mine is not so much on specific areas, but just in the air medical world in general, and then the people behind that. So like yourself. So 2019, you received quite an award, the Jim Charlson Aviation Safety Award. Congratulations. I remember when you received that. What specific things were you recognized for?
So it's really, I don't say lifetime achievement, but it was, when they submitted it, it was everything to date. It started a bit with everything we talked about, really, the air methods, SMS work, OCC, on into my consulting now, and kind of the wide range of things I've worked with. To be honest, to me, the proudest part of that, I guess I could say, is I felt like it somewhat validated my decision almost 6 years ago to leave.
Yeah.
Because I think, I feel like I was making a positive impact at our methods, but no matter how hard you try, the impact you're going to make is going to be, for that operation. You're not free to focus on what, maybe is more important or what matters as far as improvements and safety enhancements. So that was validation to me that, I made a bigger impact and it was recognized by others. So,
yeah, that's fantastic. Ames, when they do the awards now, they don't do it with the sit down dinner, and you don't get to see as much. So I
think
remember
that was how
they
did it virtual. HAI did the same thing with all the cancellations.
Yeah.
I felt fortunate because in 2019 we did have the dinner, and
yeah,
fortunate or not, did have to get up and make a speech. That's never fun.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's good to be recognized. Well deserved.
thank
So
you.
you talked about it a little bit, but talk about how COVID-19 has impacted your consulting. Have you had to do more virtually rather than in person? And will this change with the pandemic winding down? Do you see some permanent changes taking place?
Well, I mean, I feel fortunate working in the aeromedical industry, and while it was hit, it's an essential service, right? So we still had quite a bit of work to be done. Travel definitely a huge hit. It was domestic only.
Yeah.
My peak a few years ago, we hit 9 countries a few years ago. Almost all of that was the LOSA collaborative work. But what was great about that is it's a good way to, like I said, see other operations and how other people do things. So for us, we've been sticking strictly domestic in 2020. A very well established technology wise to be remote. My office is really my laptop, and very familiar with Zoom and video conferencing. So no real impact there. But there were some times with the stay-at-home orders, where we were stuck, at the home office. Not just because legally we could have gone up there as an essential business and as an essential traveler, but working with the hospital CEO, say at North Memorial, it just made sense. Their employees were taking cuts as well, and staying at home. The optics wouldn't be great for a consultant to come flying in and spreading COVID around. So
right.
I think going forward, it's really just. I don't see a huge impact with the changes, safety budgets and that kind of thing. I think once the vaccine's widespread and this kind of returns back to somewhat normal, we'll probably see a renewed focus, once the volumes get back up. But for 2021 and on, Linda and I did some strategic planning in early January, and we're really going to try to expand internationally a bit. And one of those projects, without getting too specific, it's a government project in Africa. They're trying to start an aeromedical operation and have reached out to us to help put together the team. Of course, the two of us can't do that alone, but that's when we reach out to that network of people that we know. So
interesting. Yeah. So you do see that you'll be more travel.
I do. And we're looking forward to it. I mean, I had to make a quick trip, short notice last week. And I think the way I described it was I was irrationally excited to be in an airport lounge. It's the new Centurion Lounge at Denver. I'm like, I can't believe I actually left my house early to go to the airport so I could go to the lounge. So I'm ready. We both love travel. Eventually, as empty nesters here, we'd like to take this on the road somewhat and just be completely remote and, location independent.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't been on a plane in over a year, and it's like, I have all the thing, global connect, every, type of thing to get on a plane, and I haven't been on one. So,
yeah, I, right before pandemic hit, I actually bought points to maintain status that I have not used. Fortunately, they extended it another year, but, yeah, so we're ready. We are ready to travel when the time comes. So.
Yeah. So let's talk about your personal life a little bit. You, I think it mentioned you grew up in Las Vegas and have now lived in Highlands Ranch, Colorado for several years. And you talked about your wife working at United Rotorcraft. Did you meet there? Or?
No, we didn't. We met online, but not what you think. It was the first time we ever met was on a website called beginnertriathlete.com.
Oh.
Online training, and we were unique in that we were a couple of the few mountain bikers on there, and so we just knew each other through that. And then once I had moved to Colorado, here we are.
Yeah. So were you both at Air Methods, United Air?
No,
at the same time?
Actually, I'm sorry. I guess I didn't answer. So she was at a manufacturing company outside of the industry.
Okay.
I was at Air Methods and convinced her to come over and apply in the accounting department as a cost accountant. Did that for a few years, and then she went over to United Rotorcraft. I think she likes to joke that she didn't know at the time, but she was my exit strategy, because I got her over to United Rotorcraft, and after enough complaining during our commute at Air Methods, she's like, "Why don't you just pull the trigger and use your network and start your own business like you've been talking about?"
Yeah, interesting. And you two, I believe, have a blended family. You have two daughters from a previous marriage. What are your children doing?
So I have two daughters. She has a daughter and a son. So Alexandria, she's 25. She lives out in Montrose. She's a pharmacy tech, and she's raising our first grandkid, so grandson.
Yeah,
so that's exciting. Caitlin, she's my other daughter. She's 21. She's a senior at the Air Force Academy.
Oh,
so she got picked up for flight slot. So she's not
wow,
certain yet, but she'll go to grad school for 18 months first, and then most likely end up flying fighters of some type in the Air Force.
Yeah, because has there been more slots? I know for a while there was not that many slots available, and that was quite an achievement.
Yeah, it kind of goes back and forth. I think there was a time where if you didn't want to be a pilot at the academy, you actually had to get counseled and explain why you didn't want to be a pilot to make sure you were making the right decision.
Yeah.
It's still pretty competitive to do it. But I think last I heard she was 9th out of about 1,300 or something like that. So
excellent.
So she's pretty excited to start flying. I think sometimes the questions she asks me about stuff related to aviation, I kind of joke. I ask her, like, you forget what I do for a living? Because when she was getting her skydiving qualifications, we were talking about airspace, and I made a correction. And she's like, no, you're wrong. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure I'm right, honey. But, so we're raising another type A pilot. Got to be careful what we talk about, I guess.
Yeah, that's great.
And then Reggie, he's 22. He's going back to school up in Idaho this next semester. He did a semester at home, studying right now undecided, but leaning towards some kind of psych degree.
Yeah.
And then Kira is 19. And like I mentioned earlier, we were empty nesters for about 2 months, and then coronavirus brought some of them home.
Yeah,
including the academy one. So, but Kira is attending school here in Colorado as well, and environmental economics, I believe, is the major. So attending online courses here at the house for now, and then hopefully next semester she'll be able to go back on campus.
Yeah, I think that's happened to a lot of families. So that's fantastic. So I know we've talked in the past about your love of photography and bicycling, but what do you like to do for fun?
Yeah, so the photography thing, I do have a side business. Just really pays for the gear, kind of pays for itself. It's relatively complementary to what I do, because I do focus on landscape and travel photography. So all my international or domestic trips, I try to bring some camera gear, and then just tack on a little extra day out of my own pocket, to shoot pictures. So you'll see if you go to my portfolio, there's photos from the UK and Iceland and Brunei and all over the place. So that's probably the main hobby / business. And then, I'm remiss if I didn't say it. So I also shoot some air medical as well. I shot Air Life Denver's calendar for a couple of years, and Airlink out in North Carolina. Yeah, I work with someone who's pretty well known in the industry. I think Chaz Duran from T-Max.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So he, I guess you could say, represents me on the photography side for air medical. So when he needs a shoot done, you might see me. And it's kind of nice because I'm not like a photographer you hire off the street that might walk into a tail rotor, right? So you have a built-in safety
understanding.
Pilot. Yeah. And understanding of where the aircraft's going to be and what's happening next.
So, and then what to focus on, what they're doing.
And then, like you mentioned, some cycling and hiking. You can't really live in Colorado without getting outside and enjoying it. So,
and your cycling is mostly mountain biking, right?
A little both. It depends on the season. A week ago, we got a couple 30-milers in short sleeves and shorts here in Denver. And then 3 days later, we got 27 inches of snow.
I know.
So Linda was trying to convince me to get on the cross-country skis in the neighborhood, but once the warm weather hits, I don't like to be out in the cold until next season. So
yeah, it's the cross-country is kind of, there's a little bit left here, but it got warm and then it got cold again and snowed. And so that, because I'd already been out biking, so I'm in sort of that in between. So maybe more stuff on the indoor trainer than anything. But
sure.
I like if you notice Mike's background, that's a picture that you took, right? That's not
That's Jackson Hole. Made a trip up there on my birthday, 45th birthday. It's called Mormon Row or something. Is that barn?
Yeah.
It's a real picture. It's not a virtual background. It's analog.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's 7 feet wide, so you can't. And there's quite a bit more over here behind me. About 4 feet high.
That's a great background to have. So, Mike, anything else that you'd like to say before we end the podcast?
No, I mean, I appreciate the opportunity. There's so much for us to learn from each other in this industry globally, to be honest. And part of the vision that we came up with during our strategy session with VyClimb is to promote that communication, globally between not just air medical, but the whole industry as a whole, and being able to protect lives by doing that, and I think this is just one mechanism to get people out here and talking, and safety is not should not be a competitive
absolutely
aspect. Yeah. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you on the podcast, and good to catch up with you again. Thanks again.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Air Medical Today podcast. Please come back again and also subscribe to future shows by visiting the website at airmedtoday.com, iTunes, and on the Air Medical Today YouTube channel. Air Medical Today is also on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and you can find the links on the website. Remember, if you would like to become a sponsor or provide feedback, please write to webmaster@airmedtoday.com or call 612-367-6052. Special thanks to Stanley Reeves of Room Tunes for providing his song Track 5 for use as the theme song for the podcast. You can follow Stan on Facebook at facebook.com/stanley.reeves.39. Take care and fly safe.